All right, we can now start the session. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Nurulain Yazdani, and I'm an Education USA advisor at the Lahore office. I'd like to start by introducing myself, and then I will hand it over to the Lahore Consulate. Thank you so much for joining this virtual session. I went to Mount Holyoke myself, and we have Justin. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks, Noor. So hi everybody. My name's Justin. I work at the U.S. Consulate here in Lahore. Been here a couple of months and have really been enjoying getting to learn a bit about Pakistani culture and Pakistani Lahori hospitality.
With that, we will start by a brief presentation about who we are and what we do as an organization.
Absolutely. So guys, yeah. Again, my name is Justin. I work at the U.S. Consulate here in Lahore. The goal here today is to just kind of give you guys some information about the overall process for studying or getting a student visa to study in the United States. We want this to be as helpful and practical to you all as possible. So the goal is going to be to spend a little bit of time on a presentation, but not spend too much time on that. It covers a lot of information that you can find online and that you can get from our colleagues at Education USA. Want to give you guys the opportunity to ask questions, and again, just generally be as helpful as I can to you all. Maybe just a couple of things. If you we're definitely welcome any questions, so please use the question function to pose any questions you have. You can send them at any time, and when we finish the presentation, we'll start the Q&A session. Um, I think I tend to talk a little bit fast, so if I'm talking too fast or not clearly, again, just let us know, flag it for us in the chat box or in the um, question box, and I'll slow down and accommodate. Um, so, but with that, we'll start this little presentation. Um, so yeah, I'll give just a quick brief overview of the types of visas that are available for people who want to study in the United States. A little bit about what you need to do before you get to the interview when you come to the consulate or to the embassy to do your visa interview, and then just some basic guidance on how to be prepared and present yourself effectively at the interview. Okay. So, high level, what is a visa? A visa is permission to apply for entry into the United States. So, the way it works for those who want to study in the US, you need to obtain a student visa first. But that student visa does not technically guarantee you entry into the United States, but it gives you a valid document to present to the border officials when you can get off that plane in the U.S. and get to the border and actually interact with the border officials. So anyway, it's our process for providing you with a legal travel document that you then will present to border officers when you get to the U.S. and then they make the decision uh, of whether someone can enter the United States or not. It's a little bit technical, but at a high level, that is what a visa does. So, talking about so one thing I think to kind of highlight just from the get go is, this is we're going to talk about student visas, but I do want to make clear that the student visa is actually one of the last steps in the process for studying in the United States, because the whole point of this is a travel a document, obviously along with your passport, that allows you entry into the United States to pursue a course of study, but you have to do all that research on the front end to determine where you want to study. You have to apply, be accepted, work with the student advisor at whatever university you've applied and been admitted to. So there's a lot that comes before actually applying for the visa. Okay. So but I do want to emphasize that the United States is a big country with a lot of different universities, and so I can confidently say that there is a university for or a school of higher education for everyone. We have a great community college system, in which are typically 2 years, involve a 2 years of study program. And then obviously we have 4 year universities, big schools, small schools, private schools, public universities, probably very similar to what you guys have in Pakistan. There are a lot of options in the United States. And so the first step is to start doing your homework and look into what options are available, what options fit within your budget, what interests you, etc. And all that can be done with an internet connection, you know. So it's all become very accessible these days. Um, so one thing I will say is that it's normally a good idea to apply to more than one university. Study in the United States can be quite competitive. Again, it depends on the university that you're applying to, but regardless, it's generally a good idea to apply to more than one. Obviously, hopefully, you'll be admitted to more than one, and you'll have options. And it could also be that one school gives you a better financial aid package. In other words, like a scholarship or a grant or something that kind of helps with the cost. And so, even if you get into more than one university, they may not all be the same from a financial perspective. And so, I do want to emphasize it's generally speaking a good idea to apply for more than one school. Um, so here's a little bit about, you know, one thing that I should probably also emphasize. It's a little bit technical, so I won't dwell on it too much. But for example, I work with the Department of State, and the organization that issues a visa, the people that you're going to be interacting with at the embassy or consulate are with Department of State. We actually work in coordination with another federal government agency called the Department of Homeland Security that actually manages a lot of the process or program for studying in the United States. And so we work in coordination together, but we're ultimately not the same entity. Um, so as you navigate the process for studying in the United States, you'll be essentially interacting with two different agencies, the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State. And again, I'm with the Department of State. That's where you get your visa from. Um, so but I do want to emphasize, because I think there's a lot of concern and angst over the interview process, and understandably so. As with any interview, I think it can be quite stressful. Um, but I do want to emphasize that we're not admissions counselors. Um, we're not judging, the school that you're going to or anything like that. We're simply evaluating you and your credibility as a student, somebody who is going to the United States primarily to study, to complete a course of study, and assess what you're going to do afterwards, because we can get into it in a little bit more detail, but there are a few requirements for getting a student visa. Okay. But we're not admissions officers. um it's not a college interview like you would potentially give to somebody on the admissions faculty at a university. We're simply trying to understand whether you meet the qualifications for a student visa. So it's a little bit different. I'll go really quickly over the different types of visas you can use, or they can be vehicles for studying in the United States. Probably the most common one is called the F1. Um, that's that's people going to an accredited U.S. college or university. There is another visa category called the M1, which it's for a vocational school or program. I'll tell you, like, an example of that would be somebody maybe going to flight school in the United States. Those are generally on an M1 visa. So that's a trade specific program of study, and so it falls into a different visa category. Um, so that's another category, and then the third is the J1 visa, which is for cultural and educational exchange, includes our Fulbright program. Um, but uh, but in any event, there are multiple programs that fall under the J1 visa category. Um, but it's specifically for cultural and educational exchange. Another thing that often comes with the J1 visa category is a requirement that you go back to your country of origin or leave the United States for 2 years um, before you would be eligible to, for example, become a legal permanent resident or adjust to an immigrant status. Um, because the point of the visa is to facilitate exchange, cultural and educational exchange between two countries, in this case, Pakistan and the United States. So anyway, enough about that. Again, that's pretty a little bit technical. So let's see. How can you prepare for your interview? Um, so we recommend applying at least 120 days before your start date. It's actually been a little while since I've done visa interviews. It used to be, at least, that we weren't able to print the visa more than 120 days out from your program start date. That may or may not be the case anymore. I'm not sure. Ultimately, not an issue either way, because if you apply more than 120 days out and we can't print the visa, then we'll just coordinate with you so that we can print your visa once you're within that 120-day period prior to your program start date. So no big deal there, but go ahead and apply early. Um, it shows that you're prepared. Um, I think it kind of indicates that you have a plan. And then realistically, there's just so many things that go into moving to a different country, studying in a new place. Just if you think through all the things that you're going to need to do mentally and then logistically to study in the United States, it makes sense that you would apply well in advance to give yourself time to get to the United States and be ready for when the semester starts. So if you think about it, it really is, it's pretty natural, I think, that recommendation of applying early. And I think it does show that you're an organized and thoughtful, intentional student, you know? So again, some other technical things, make sure that you have a passport that has that's valid for at least 6 months after the day you would be entering the United States. Pretty, that sort of thing is pretty typical for almost any country you're going to go to where you need a visa. They want to make sure that your passport's going to be valid. Um, and then we want do your research, be able to articulate to uh, why you want to study at the university that you've selected, that you've been accepted to. That's I think that's pretty basic, but that's something that not everyone always can speak effectively to. But but it is important to know, to be able to articulate clearly why this university, why this program of study. So anyway, again, oh, did it drop off? Okay, thanks. Um, so anyway, and then there is a fee to apply for the student visa, and I think we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail just in a second. But so yeah, so again, going back to this kind of procedurally, what you do. So the Department of Homeland Security has a registration program. This is done, basically this is done in coordination with your university, right? So you apply to a university, you're admitted. You're going to be in contact with a international student advisor or a designated university official who's going to generate an I-20 for you, which is a form that you're going to bring with you to your interview. Um, and it's basically it's official documentation that you've been accepted to a university. One of the things that you need to do is pay what's called a SEVIS fee. And again, this is a fee. The SEVIS program is a program run by the Department of Homeland Security to track um, international students in the United States. And so anybody who's studying in the United States needs to be registered with SEVIS, and is kind of like a cost, basically to help fund the cost of their operations. There is a fee that you need to pay in addition to your student visa fee, um, in order for the visa to be printed and to be able to go to the United States. So, in addition to the fee that you'll pay for applying for a student visa, you're also going to pay this registration or SEVIS fee to the Department of Homeland Security, and you should have paid that before you do your interview at the embassy or consulate. So, just really quickly. So, okay. So, yes, in terms of what you're going to bring for your interview, you're going to bring that I-20. So, again, this is a document that's issued by the school to which you've been accepted, the one that you plan on attending. They're going to issue the I-20. You're going to pay the SEVIS fee for that to attend, for that school. Um, if you go back to this previous page, it says it's usually you get a one SEVIS number for 1 year of one school. So, um, in any event, so this is an individual SEVIS fee or fee that you're paying for the school that you intend to study at. So bring that I-20 to your interview. Make sure you've paid your SEVIS fee. Make sure that you have your receipt showing that you've paid. It's called an MRV fee, but paid your fee for the visa interview. Um, you need to fill out a visa application, okay? And then you need to bring a 2 by 2 photo on a white background, with both your hairline and your ears visible, um, to you or with you rather to the interview so that they can scan that in to your profile. So I-20, pay your SEVIS fee, make sure you have your receipt showing that you paid for your visa interview. Of course, fill out the visa application and then have that 2 by 2 passport sized photo with you on the day of the interview. So here's just a little bit of information on how you can the process for filling out your application and paying the visa application fee. Okay. So the website is www.ustraveldocs.com. That's going to take you to like a general website that's used worldwide by the Department of State for people to apply for US visas. And from there, it'll guide you to applying in Islamabad or Karachi or wherever you're going to apply. And it'll take you through the steps for completing your application. So you fill out the application, you pay the fee, and then you're going to schedule your interview appointment. And then, and so anyway, you get a specific date and time at which you're supposed to be at the consulate or embassy that you registered to do your interview, and then you show up at that. You show up on time on the day of your interview, so that you can do your interview with a consular officer. So, we've gone through the things that you absolutely must have for the interview. Here are things that you should bring with you just in case the consular officer asks for them. And there's no guarantee that you're going to be asked these things, but you should have them just in case, and you should certainly be willing or ready to speak to them in case asked. Okay. So one of those things is transcripts, diplomas, or certificates, evidence of your educational achievement or attainment up to this point, to the point of your interview, any standardized test scores, for our graduate students, people who are going to be going to graduate school in the United States. And if you have any like relevant employment or anything like that, having a CV, any type of like research that you've done, um, any projects you've worked on, anything, essentially, anything that you would bring with you if you were to be talking to like a school official and making the case for why you want to study at a given institution. Again, this isn't an admissions interview, but these are things that you should just have on hand in case you're asked, and be prepared to speak to. And then this is a big one: financial evidence that you can cover at least the first year of tuition and living expenses. Um, so in terms of evidence, you could bring bank statements, income tax documents, pay stubs. Um, it's not always the case that the consular officer asks for this financial evidence, the evidence that you have money to pay um, for the schooling, but you certainly want to be prepared. You want to have those documents ready in case they do ask, and you definitely need to be prepared to talk about how you or your family or whoever's helping you financially to study in the U.S., how they and you are going to cover that the cost, because studying in the United States can be very expensive. Um, and so that's a big thing, can be a stumbling block for some people. You need to be realistic about where you choose to enroll, because studying in the US can be so expensive. You can get into a school which is itself a great accomplishment, but you also need to be able to afford it, just like somebody in the United States would need to be able to afford university. It's It's a constraint or a consideration for everybody, from U.S. students to international students. And as an international student, part of qualifying for that student visa is being able to show that you're going to be able to cover the cost. And a big reason for that, I will say, is because there are strict limitations on the employment that you can engage in while a student. Um, you generally speaking, you can't work off campus. You can only work on campus and for only like up to 20 hours per week, except during holidays. So there are a lot of restrictions in place, and any income that you earn from working at the school is really only going to be supplemental to what you're going to need for the full academic year and for your living expenses. All right. So, what is the consular officer looking for? Well, four things. Who are you? What do you want to do? How are you going to pay for it? And what do you intend on doing once you're done with your program of study? And that's a big thing too. Is a student visa is not an immigrant visa. It's not a visa to stay in the United States forever. We're looking for genuine, bona fide students who are going to the United States primarily to engage in a program of study, after which they're going to return to their home country or at the very least depart the United States. It's a visa for temporary status in the United States. And again, I don't do interviews here in Pakistan, so I'm not speaking about the local context, but I have been an officer who's done interviews in other places, and I can say that I think some students, or as people who want a student visa, really view that student visa as just a way of getting to the United States. And there's almost this idea of, I'll just figure it out when I get there, but I just want to get there first. And it's not necessarily that they don't intend to be a student, but maybe they don't have the money to finance their studies, or they want to study, but they also want to work, which isn't permitted. Um, or they really want to go to the United States and then just stay there. And those aren't within the scope of a student visa. The student visa is for serious students, and that's one of the things that we're evaluating when you apply for your student visa. All right. So, again, not to belabor this too much, but does the applicant intend to study at an accredited U.S. educational institute? Do you have the money? Do you intend to depart the U.S. at the completion of your studies? Those are kind of fundamentally the big questions that we're trying to answer or see if you can answer. Um, so it's not rocket science. It's not intended to be super tricky, but fundamentally these are the requirements, the legal requirements for the visa. And it goes back to what I said earlier. We're not an admissions counselor. You're not we're not evaluating that's like per se the school that you're going to or anything like that. We're looking at your qualifications for a student visa, and primarily we're looking to see how you fit in to the requirements of the visa based on these three questions. So in terms of recommendations, be honest, be confident, make sure that you're answering the question that the officer asks. I'm going to say this next one, asking for a translator. most for most programs of study in the United States, um, you really need to have a strong command of English. If you don't understand something, I think maybe a better way to put this is, if you don't understand something, it's okay to ask the officer to repeat the question. I mean, as with any interview or any as I think common sense would kind of dictate, you don't necessarily want to ask the consular officer to repeat every question. But if you don't understand something, just be honest and say, "I didn't understand. Can you please repeat?" But try to do the interview in English. It's a pretty big deal, um, and one of the things that we're evaluating, because it's a pretty fundamental, basic thing. If you don't have a strong proficiency or mastery of English, it kind of raises the question of how you're going to be able to complete um, advanced studies in the United States, the vast majority of whose courses are going to be in English, right? So, and then just have all your documents together. And I would also say, just as a tip, uh, let the consular officer ask for the documents that he or she wants to see. You don't need to push documents at the officer. Some people don't even like that. Just have them ready. If they want to see something else, they'll let you know. And if you know where they are, if you can put your hands on them easily, that's fine. You know. And I'm going to circle back to one more thing about being honest and confident. Um, being honest is super important. You know, it speaks to if the consular officer has a reason to believe that maybe you're not being 100% honest. It's like if he or she can't trust you, can't trust what you're saying in during the interview or in one aspect or to like one of the questions, they're going to wonder, well, how do I feel confident that this person is actually a serious student, that they're actually going to not work in the United States illegally, that they're going to depart the United States at the end of the program. It kind of calls into question um, your integrity and your purpose of applying for the visa in the first place. um, the other thing I'll say is, in terms of people who might be tempted to not be honest, to either exaggerate their credentials or just take a shot at applying for a student visa even when they're not actually serious students. You're going to do this interview, hopefully just one time and get your visa, but you're going to, you go to this interview one time, whereas the consular officers talk to at least 100 people a day. They've probably talked to thousands of people before you, so they're pretty good at determining who's being honest and who's not. And so the odds of you getting away with it, you could get away with it, but you probably won't. And if you don't, if they note that you haven't been honest, your chances of getting a visa, even if you reapply, are not great, right? I mean, because your credibility is kind of shot. So be honest. And then I'll say, in terms of being confident, again, just be confident in the sense that nobody's trying to get you, nobody's trying to trip you up, nobody wants you to fail. Again, you've gotten into the school in the United States. It's a priority of the United States government to facilitate study in the US for international students to come to the US, experience American culture, go attend American universities. That's what we want. I mean, what you want is what we want. The problem is there's some people who abuse the program or who are not qualified and aren't in a position. They actually get to the United States and they're not in a position to actually, their English isn't good enough, or they don't have the money to pay for the school. And so they can't actually adhere to the rules of the student visa program. But all things equal, we want to issue a visa. We want to facilitate legitimate travel to the US and legitimate students to study in the US. And so in that sense, you can be confident because it's not a gotcha kind of situation where people are being mean spirited or hoping for you to fail. If you know you're telling the truth and you are sincere and really know your stuff, you know why you've applied to the school that you have, you know what you want to study and why, you can articulate all that, you have an idea of what you want to do after you finish your studies, you can be confident knowing that the consular officer is going to be happy that you're a prepared applicant. I mean, I think you can be confident that, hey, this is exactly what they're looking for. They're going to be happy to hear this. They're going to be happier to issue the visa than to have to refuse you. So I feel like the being honest and prepared and then being confident all kind of go hand in hand, because again, in an ideal world, the consular officer wants to say yes, right? It's just you have to prove to them. But if you're the real deal, if you're a real student who has the resources to pay and everything like that, then you've got nothing to hide and you can be confident about that, if that makes sense. I'll go over this really quickly. So there are three possible outcomes from your interview. One, the best case scenario is you're approved, and so you're approved. Your passport stays at the consulate or embassy where you're doing the interview for the visa to be printed, and then you'll get your passport sent to you with the visa. Um, then there is what we call administrative processing, which just means it means it's neither been approved nor refused, and the refusal is not permanent. It's just we need more information before we can make a final decision. And then finally, if you're actually refused, you'll get another sheet of paper explaining why you don't qualify for the student visa. So approved, oftentimes it depends on where you're applying. Oftentimes, if you're approved, you'll just be told verbally by the officer your visa is approved, expected after X number of days. If you need you need to provide additional information. They'll give you a piece of paper and highlight or write down what they need from you so that they can make a decision. And then if you're refused, you'll get a different type of letter saying thank you for applying. Unfortunately, you don't qualify right now. So those are the three outcomes from the interview. Uh, I won't belabor it anymore. The administrative processing, it can range for so many things. One thing I'll say, I mean, some of them more serious, not serious, but like sometimes maybe you need to provide additional evidence that you can pay for school or something. But it can also be things like you didn't pay your SEVIS fee before your interview, so you're qualified for the visa, but you didn't pay the SEVIS fee, and they can't approve the visa until you pay it and provide evidence that you've paid. So really, the quote unquote administrative processing ranges from administrative to you need to provide additional evidence that you actually qualify for the visa. And so those are two different things, both of which fall under the category of administrative processing. All right, almost done, guys. So look, just real quick, you're gonna get that you're gonna get that so I said an I-20 earlier. I-20s are for F1 and M1 visas. You get a DS 2019 for a J1 visa, but regardless, it's your official form saying that you've been accepted into a program of study. So you're going to get that, and you're going to want to bring either the DS 2019 or the I-20, depending on the type of visa you're applying for. You're going to want to bring that with you to the interview. You're going to pay your SEVIS fee before the interview. And then just to be prepared, this has the website on it, but it's easy to find online www.fmjfee.com. You can pay there, and then you can also bring proof of payment to the interview just in case the consular officer wants to see it. Make sure you fill out your application, pay the fee, schedule your appointment. And then on the day of the interview, make sure that you've got your photo, your DS-160 confirmation page, so that when you show up, you can show, hey, look, this is who I am, and I've got an interview scheduled on this day, etc. And then either the DS 2019 or the I-20. Also, wherever you end up applying, you can also go to if you're applying here in Pakistan, you can look at the U.S. Embassy Pakistan webpage, and it has local guidance on what you should bring to the interview. So, but regardless of whatever country you apply in, look up the website for the U.S. Embassy or consulate where you're going to be applying. They should have information on what to bring for the interview. Okay. Um, and then again, you'll do your interview, at the end of which the interviewing officer will let you know the decision: approved, under administrative processing, or refused, being the three likely outcomes. Okay. All right. That's it. Done with the presentation part. Now open for questions. So I know you guys have probably already submitted a few. Yes, indeed. So, Noor, do you have any in particular?
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin, for the detailed presentation. We will now take questions. The first question we have is, I have MS nuclear engineering degree. I want to pursue PhD in the United States. Is there any restriction regarding visa issuance to nuclear engineering graduate?
Um, no, I mean, you can apply for the program in the United States. Look, the interviewing officer might have questions for you. I mean, more specifically about what research you've done, what courses you've taken. Yeah, what your studies have been or look like up to this point. You can certainly apply. You can certainly qualify. To study nuclear engineering in the United States. Um, it's just that if they need additional information from you, like a CV or, um, yeah, like a list of research publications, you might get put in administrative processing on the day of your interview, and then it's incumbent on you to provide that information, and then the consular officer can make a more informed decision. But it is certainly totally fine for you to want to study, and totally possible that you could study nuclear engineering in the U.S.
Thank you so much for this. We have another question. Do we need to pay SEVIS fee twice if being rejected or refused?
The SEVIS fee, You should go to like USCIS's website. It might be good for a year. I'm not 100%, but no, like generally speaking, say you apply for state university and you get refused the first time and you decide you want to apply again, you don't need to pay the SEVIS fee again. Like you apply the first time, you apply again a month later, your SEVIS fee is still valid.
We have another question where anonymous attendee is asking if freelancing is a red flag and if visa officer will consider that as a 9 to 5 job. Is that going to be a hindrance for them in their visa application?
Um, no, I mean, I think inherently, I don't think there's inherently wrong with doing freelance work, at all. Uh, I think the big thing that the consular officer is going to be looking for is how likely is it that you are to engage in unlawful employment in the U.S. while you're a student. But I mean, it's certainly reasonable, um, to have worked in your home country even while you're a student. I don't think there's nothing to hide there. Um, you know, yeah, I think just be prepared to talk about it and make sure and then just make it clear to the consular officer that you understand the rules. But I'll just say additionally that it can even be a good thing, right? If you say you've already done your university studies in Pakistan or someplace other than the U.S. and you've got well, even if it's freelance work, you've got experience in your industry, and now you want to get an advanced degree. Um, that just falls under work experience, and could potentially be viewed positively by the consular officer. I think it depends on the totality of your circumstances and whether they believe you're going to follow U.S. immigration law or not.
Thank you. Before I take any more questions, I'd like to remind all the participants that please, we will be only taking questions regarding F1 visas. For questions related university application process or anything related to that, please go on our website, educationusa.pk, and you will find a link to get in touch with us. Thank you. Okay, so we have another question. If my PhD is supported through graduate assistantship and I have the funding offer from the university, do I still need to show the financial statement?
I say just bring it. I mean, again, there's certainly no guarantee that the consular officer is going to ask for it. Um, I think generally every place I've been, the emphasis is on having a conversation with the applicant and trying to just simply assess their qualifications without a lot of documentation. But again, it's certainly a best practice to have that information with you in case asked. Um, just don't expect again. I would just say let the consular officer ask for it if they want it, and don't rely on that to tell your story. Be prepared to just talk about how you're going to pay and all of that, and have the other in your back pocket in case asked for.
Thank you so much. We have another question here. What is the total time for administrative processing? For some cases, can it exceed 120 days?
Certainly, yeah, there are definitely no guarantees. But again, really want to emphasize just how widely how many different issues or topics, kind of that bucket of administrative processing covers. Again, if it's paying a SEVIS fee, we sometimes have people who show up and don't have their I-20 with them, which do not recommend because that doesn't make you look like a particularly prepared student. Having said that, it happens. Life happens. People have bad days. Things happen on the way to the embassy, and so you don't have an I-20 or you haven't paid your SEVIS fee yet. Those are easy fixes. They're administrative details that need to be worked out, but that don't necessarily speak to your qualifications for the visa. So those things, you could be talking about a 1 day turnaround, or I mean, the thing is with the administrative processing is usually, but not always, the ball is in your court. Something is missing from your application, or the consular officer needs additional information. And so it's incumbent or it's expected that you're going to provide that information. And until you do, they're not going to be able to make a final decision. And so, but there are unfortunately circumstances where, for who knows, too many reasons, a wide enough range of reasons that there's no sense in getting into details or specifics here, where it can take a long time and you could potentially um, miss the start date, which is another reason to apply early enough. And again, I will emphasize, I feel like, again, speaking as a former interviewing officer, generally speaking, I found the um, better qualified applicants to be people who are applying early enough for all the reasons I said earlier, which is um, there's just a lot of logistics that are involved in moving to a new country and studying, doing something like studying, in a different language in a different place. And when one of those things, or one of those contingency factors that I feel like you need to consider, is the fact that there might be administrative processing. The consular officer might need a little bit of extra time to process your case, and you want to make sure that you have enough cushion time before your program start date that you can get all those needs addressed, and have your visa issued in time. So yes, it can take over 120 days. Most of the time, it does not.
Thank you so much for this. Is it a good idea to ask for a translator during the F1 interview?
I know what the presentation said. No, I mean, generally speaking, I think if you, and, again, you take somebody like me. I sometimes talk too fast, and I recognize that. If you get somebody like me who talks too fast, feel free to ask them to slow down. I mean, it's your interview, and I mean, it's on the officer also, to be clear. Um, so don't be shy about asking somebody to repeat their question or even rephrase. I would just, again, think hard before applying. Like, if you're going to have a hard time conducting an interview in English for a student visa, how likely are you to be successful for a higher level education program or study in the United States? I've studied foreign languages. I've never done what you guys are, considering doing, which is I've never studied at the university level in another language. But even what I've done is difficult. I mean, like, it's hard operating in another country, exclusively in another language. What you guys are trying to do, which is, get a university degree or a postgraduate degree, that's even harder. So if you can't do a basic conversation, a basic interview in English, then I think that might speak to, like, your preparedness to succeed as a student in the US. So for that reason, I'd say definitely, you know, be confident enough to ask people to repeat if they're not clear, but try to do the English or the interview in English, because there are few, if any, circumstances in which it's okay to request a translator.
Thank you. Another question we have here is, if after rejection I change my I-20 to a better school and from M1 visa to F1 visa, would I have to pay the service fee again?
If you're talking an M1 to an F1, I'd refer you to USCIS's website. I'm going to guess that the answer is probably yes, because at that point, I mean, you're talking about two different programs of study. And so, to the earlier question about, like, say you stay within the F1 category, but now you've been accepted to a different school and you're registering. I'm pretty sure you're going to have to pay another fee, because if you go back to the presentation, it said basically like one school, one service fee. And again, if you think about it, I mean, not that it matters that much, but USCIS has this program. They have this database for tracking international students in the United States, and they're tracking you as an international student to the university with which you're affiliated. So if you've changed universities or something like that, then you probably have to pay another fee, because they have to process you again, and whatever they're charging you is covering their cost for running that program. So anyway, it's all to say, if you're changing visa categories, pretty sure you're going to need to pay another service fee. And if you change schools, again, you'll probably need to pay another service fee.
Can a gap of 2 year affect visa approval? Basically, they've probably taken a gap year for more, like for 2 years, so they're wondering if that is going to affect their visa approval.
I mean, it could, or I mean, it depends on what you've done during that time. Gap years have become increasingly common. I don't know if you guys know, but former President Obama's one of his daughters took a gap year, and it's something that people definitely do. Again, you just need to be prepared to speak to um what you were doing during that time. And I don't want to get into my personal perspective or bias too much, but I don't have a problem with it at all. But, like, realistically, if you're just kind of helping mom and dad at home, and you've taken a complete pause on kind of your professional development and educational development, then I think you just need to be very prepared to speak to why you did that and why you've decided to resume your studies.
With this, another question we have here is, does university's name influence visa officer or impact our interview?
Look, no, I mean, we issue visas for people to study at any number or a very wide range of universities. The reality, is that in the United States, some universities are more selective than others. And so it might indicate, I mean, when you're talking about your qualifications for a student as a student, um, it might be taken as a piece of information in terms of like, hey, this, this person obviously excelled in their studies here in Pakistan. They were able to get into this very selective school. Um, you can't really get into this school without being a serious student. Conversely, or another thing I would say is, say you get financial aid from a university, regardless of how prestigious or whatever it is, um, that that speaks to the ability to pay, right? And so, and then again, it speaks to your qualifications. Like, you were a strong enough student that you were able to qualify for financial aid. Um, so those are good things. But with that said, like, you don't have to go to Harvard. We have a wide range of universities in the United States, and a lot of good options, even ones that maybe you hadn't heard of before you started researching about studying in the U.S. And we issue visas to people who are going to all over the U.S. And we don't get overly hung up on the particular university that you'll be studying at. But I will say this: if if you exclusively are applying to schools that are not very, I mean, we're talking, there are some schools out there that are just not very selective. And if you do that, again, it's not necessarily a no, but we might have some additional questions like, you know, where all did you apply, or why did you apply here? And just be prepared to speak to it. There's no right or wrong answer. Just remember, we're looking for bona fide serious students. And sometimes the number of schools that people apply to and the schools that people apply to could speak to an ulterior motive, what they really want to go to the United States for. Is it to be a student, or is it to engage in unlawful employment? And are they prepared to succeed as students in the United States? That's all we care about. We don't care about um, judging the rank of the school that you got into or anything like that. But sometimes it can speak to kind of your preparedness to study in the U.S. So they can be correlated without it being causal, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Another question we have here is, I'm currently awaiting immigration from the USCIS. If I apply for an F1 or J1 visa, does it require me to surrender my immigration process? If not, what if I get the immigration during my study there? Will my F1, J1 visa be converted to a green card?
This is a very specific immigration question. I don't even know if I totally understood it. I think what I would say is, so, I mean, first off, is the person in the United States right now, or are they in Pakistan? And,
I think they're
or
right now in
are they
Pakistan.
outside the US? So they're outside the United States, likely here in Pakistan, and they're going through some type of immigration process.
I think they've applied, they're currently in Pakistan and they've applied for immigration in the US. What they're asking is if you can only apply for one category of visa, like does it have to be just immigration or they have to like withdraw, like they cannot apply for F1 if they've applied for an immigration visa.
So, I mean, I'm not going to get too specific on this because there are a whole lot of immigrant visa or like immigration status categories. But I'll say, for example, I mean, it's possible that this person has some family member who's a U.S. citizen who's petitioned for them or petitioned for their parents to go to the United States. Maybe the person's under 21 years of age, and in theory, and so would thus potentially qualify for an immigrant visa. Um, you can look. I mean, you can still, in a situation like that where you're potentially waiting to immigrate to the United States, you can still apply for a student visa. Um, I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't, but I mean, in that specific situation, technically you can, and it's just going to depend on your circumstances, right? A non-immigrant visa is for somebody who intends to go to the United States temporarily. And an immigrant visa, obviously, is somebody who's going to go and live in the United States, presumably live in the United States permanently, or at least have the United States as their primary residence. So the two things are fundamentally different. And so I would just say, if you're trying to use a non-immigrant visa to get to the United States sooner because you have this immigrant intent, then you're not using the non-immigrant visa correctly, and there is a chance that you will not qualify for it. Um, but there's nothing to prevent you from applying for the student visa. But again, I gave a specific example of somebody awaiting a family petition, for an immigrant visa. This person might have a totally different immigration status, and so for that reason, I definitely can't get into any more specifics. But you do see that where people both might immigrate to the United States at some point in the future, but in the meantime want to study in the U.S. And the successful ones will credibly be students and have be able to articulate what their kind of short, at least what their short and medium and probably long term plans are as well.
Thank you for this. Another question is, I paid my service fee, but I wrote my surname wrong. Can that be rectified?
Yeah, my understanding is it can. So that's another situation where, for example, if you don't have that corrected before your interview, and you qualify, you might be put in administrative processing for your SEVIS information to be corrected. It kind of depends. I'm going to be honest with you. That's not something I've ever focused on a whole lot. I mean, I think what it comes down to for anything like that, first off, if you caught a mistake, go ahead and get it corrected, right? Before your interview. And then in terms of whether we would ask you to correct it before issuing, physically putting the visa in your passport, um, it depends on whether we think it's going to create problems for you at the border. Again, it's not because we're the Department of State, but when you get to the border, you're interacting with officials from a different agency, the Department of Homeland Security, and so we would be doing you a disservice by issuing you the visa, putting it in your passport, and then you showing up and running and having some unnecessary problems at the border, including you being potentially turned around or something. So, as a best practice, anything that we think could be a problem, we just say, look, you know what, fix it before we issue you the visa. And that's a way that we can kind of make sure that you fix something before it's a problem for you later on.
Thank you for this. Any additional tips for a good F1 visa interview?
I don't think so. Again, I don't know. It seems like I don't, again, because I don't do interviews here. You know, my sense is that Pakistan might be similar. I worked in, Vietnam at one point, and um, I feel like the countries could be similar in terms of there being a lot of interest in studying in the U.S. And we got a whole wide range of applicants in Vietnam, from people who were extremely well qualified to people who were really, they were treating the program almost like a lottery, like maybe I'll get lucky and get issued a student visa, and then I'll just go to the U.S. and stay. And and again, I would just advise you, if you're in that latter category where you're not really prepared to study in the U.S. either financially or with your English proficiency, or academically, like you don't have a strong academic record to date, um, I would recommend against applying and just taking your chances. But then otherwise, but if you're on the other hand, like it's important. It's a major priority of the U.S. government. It's a priority in our relationship, the U.S. relationship with Pakistan, to get qualified students over to the United States to study. So again, I can tell you as a person who's done a lot of interviews, if I had my preference, I would issue everybody. I mean, that would be my preference. Um, but you pretty clearly can't do that because ultimately the consular officer is paid and expected to follow immigration law. And it gets pretty obvious. You get some people who apply and they're just not, there's just no credible way to believe that they're actually going to the United States to complete, a degree, and that they're going to have the money where they don't need to work. I mean, so you kind of have to ask yourself I would recommend asking yourself those hard questions before you apply. But if you're really serious and you've got the means to pay, um, then I would just say, come to the interview, be prepared, treat it like a job interview, right? Like, in other words, everything you would do in terms of putting your best foot forward, do that, and then just be confident that the consular officer is coming from a good place, and that it's not intended to be, a scenario where you get tripped up or anything like that. I mean, people want you to succeed, and so I think you can at least feel confident about that.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left, so just two more questions. If I miss my admission due to delay in F1 administrative processing and later my visa is approved, Can I use it for another school, or will I need to apply for F1 again for the new school?
I mean, it depends on how. I wouldn't get too overly focused on that. Again, I would say it's a pretty small percentage of cases. Again, I haven't interviewed. I don't have a lot of visa interview experience here in Pakistan, um, but just generally speaking, it's not. It's the small minority of cases that get put in administrative processing for long periods of time. Um, we do it absolutely happens. We tell people to apply early, but we have even qualified students who apply relatively late in the student season uh uh, window or period before like the semester starts. And for whatever reason, if you another thing that we'll typically do in situations like that. So I say it depends on how far you are past the start date of the school year. Um, it does happen where we're not able to get people their visas before the first day of class. At which point we normally tell them to go back to their school official and have their I-20 updated with corrected start dates. Again, that's meant to help you as the student so that you don't get to the border because otherwise, again, you do the interview with us, but this is just permission to apply for entry into the U.S. Then you get to the border, and so it's if the DHS official sees that the school year's already started, and you're telling them that you're going to the United States to be a student, you could get you could open up a whole box of questions and run the risk of being refused entry into the United States. We don't want that to happen, and so what we typically do is we say, look, you qualify for the visa, but go to your school, get your I-20 updated, and then we'll issue the visa. And that just saves you problems or the possibility of problems at the border. Now, if you're talking about a situation where you're not just missing like a week or 2 weeks, but you're missing like an entire semester or something like that, um, at that point, I that's a rare enough occurrence that I don't even know that I want to comment on it because that might be I don't even know exactly what would be going on in that situation. And if you're waiting to like for example, if you postpone your studies until like the next year, you might have to pay the service fee again, which isn't the end of the world. But to answer that question, it might be necessary depending on how far back you're pushing your studies.
Thank you. Last question. Does taking a student loan impact the visa process?
Um, Not necessarily. I haven't seen that a whole lot in the places I worked previously. Maybe it's common here. Um, yeah, I don't know how common that is. I would say, yeah, I'd hate to give guidance on that. I really because I don't also know with people here in Pakistan are taking loans. I don't know if they're taking loans here within the country or if they're somehow accessing international finance, like financing from outside of Pakistan, what the interest rates are. I mean, there are a lot of things that could potentially impact like the financial viability of that. And whether you would need to work in the United States to repay those loans. I don't know the conditions of the loan. You know what I mean? Um, so I'd hate to comment on that too specifically, but definitely if you have like an unusual circumstance, what you see commonly is you might have a family member, for example, who's helping out with the cost of study in the United States and being prepared to talk about that and why they're helping and all that is just the best practice. Just be prepared to tell your story or to tell the truth of where you're getting the money from.
All right. Thank you so much, Justin, for your time and for answering all these questions. Thank you so much for attending. We will have the recording up on our Facebook page, so you can check that out. For any more information, please email us at lahore@educationusa.org. And with that, thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you guys so much. I hope you guys found it useful and you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.